Blimey, mate, what does the angelic radio tell you about Jesus?
I've already explained this in some books and spoken about it, but I'll try to summarize it here and add to it. Something I don't usually talk about. These beings of the so-called Trimurti hierarchy, if we use the definition of the Trimurti, Hindu, but if we look at Greek mythology, we call these beings archons, who own the heavens of this neighboring universe, and who also want to own this universe where we live.
Is there a war going on all the time? They're constantly trying to take us over, right?
All the time. One of the books I published explaining this is called Sophia, the Archons and the Dispute for Universal Suzerainty. These figures, they've always tried to dominate everything and win the earth through a series of processes, which I can't explain here, was left in history.
Which book is that in?
There are several.
Yes, but there are 50-odd books.
There are several.
But all right, sorry.
There are several lectures on this. But in terms of books, just for those listening who want to buy something to delve deeper,
I wouldn't even know how to explain, perhaps, but go to Gene's website. There are 57 books there, 50-something books. It'll be here in the pinned comment, okay?
Thank you. So, remember I mentioned earlier that Shiva was acting in India too, trying to dominate the earth through a people he was creating, called the Dravidians, who would later become the Hindus. At that same time, Vishnu, talking to Yahweh, the Brahma, said, "Oh, Shiva has begun. There. It's time for you to start creating." This notion of a chosen people arose because of that. So Hebrews and Jews, and the fact that Jesus was born in the lineage that began with Adam, and the Bible describes this entire lineage to prove it, is the backdrop to the story. So what's the problem? The problem is that Yahweh first chose Enoch. Enoch was the seventh patriarch: Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch. Yahweh removed Enoch from the earth.
Isn't Enoch the one who went to paradise without dying?
He spent 300 years there and returned, dictated 366 books to his son Methuselah, and was then taken away to live there in paradise, which isn't paradise, it's this neighboring universe. So, when Enoch dictated these books to his son Methuselah, Enoch was warning the world what Yahweh had commanded him to do, that in the future, as Adam and Eve had betrayed his trust, all of humanity would be punished, would be chastised. But there, in the future, he would make the great judgment, the day of final judgment. Enoch was the one who announced this. But then Yahweh said through Enoch, "Before that, I will send my Messiah, who will prepare everything, and then I will execute the judgment." So Jesus is this guy who was announced from that time after Enoch. Several prophets spoke of this super Messiah who would come, beat everyone up, transform the earth into a single empire, so that Yahweh could judge which humans now wanted to stay with him. Eternally in heaven, and who would be damned to hell. All this still is a result of the problem of Adam and Eve. See how ridiculous it is, but it's terribly real. So, when Yahweh lost control over Enoch, when Jacob was forced to have several sons, 12 sons, so that from these 12 tribes Yahweh could look again and choose which was the best genetic lineage, Mary, mother of Jesus, was a descendant of the 12th tribe. That is, the 12th child that Jacob had was the genetics chosen by Yahweh for the mother to be born. And the father? That's the problem. When Yahweh and Brahma, who is also known as Brahma and Vishnu, were talking, then Vishnu said, "Yahweh, you've lost control over Enoch. because Yahweh wanted Enoch to be his Jesus, but he lost him. Enoch was taken to the neighboring universe and placed inside a suit called Metatron. And that's a whole other mess. So plan B was for Vishnu to say, Brahma, you can't create avatars from yourself because Brahma is soulless. Only those who create avatars. Wow!
Does soulless just mean without a soul?
Without a soul, because due to the Creator's problem, who in creating this fell into creation and lost. The connection with his spirit became soulless. That's why everything here is holographic. It's another story. But Vishnu and Shiva can create avatars. Shiva created a ton of avatars. Vishnu created a ton of avatars. Brahma didn't. That's why Brahma chooses people to represent him. Then Vishnu said, look, it's time for you to organize your people. Because Shiva's, since you can't create any avatar, I'll lend you an avatar. I'll make myself your avatar. And Brahma or Yahweh accepted. But they live in this neighboring universe. And they had created a being called Hokama, which is the biological being that lives in this universe of ours. This Hokama was created about 6 billion years ago. And it's known in Kabbalah as Malkuth, which is the 10th Sephirah. But Hokama was mentioned in the books of the ancient Hebrews. When Jesus was a boy and Mary and Joseph forgot him in Jerusalem, they left and came back. Later to fetch him, they found Jesus there in the temple questioning the doctors of the law. The question Jesus asked there was because on that day the doctor of the law was reading the book of Wisdom of Solomon, and he says, and Solomon says, why you, O Hokama, who is the executor of God's will and feeling what God desires would not be done. Look what a strange thing. Then Jesus, a boy, heard this and said that this Hokama and the doctors of the law didn't know. How to explain? This Hokama is a biological being created by the beings of this neighboring universe to represent them here. So, when the neighbor offered to be born as a human, he actually gave an order to Hokama, who was a neighbor's avatar, for Hokama to become human. But Hokama has no sex. It's a biodermal being. They have no emotions and no sexual organs. The angels of Hokama, who would later be known in Greek culture as Sophia, that is not a name, it's an epithet. It means ask for the unification of wisdom. So these angels came to Sophia and said, oh, there's only one way for you to produce a avatar of yours. It's if we remove part of your HR1 area. Our genome, 28,869 genes, is divided into areas. The HR1 area is where the genes that make us human are. Making an analogy, the HR1 area of the genome of this being called Sophia is what makes it who it is. We can give our DNA and continue being who we are. But the type of operation that was done was to remove Sophia's quantum signature and inseminate it into Mary. So Sophia became somewhat inert, hospitalized, let's say, while Jesus was, fulfilling his function. So the birth of Jesus, going now to your question, had to be done in these terms. That is, a virgin was artificially inseminated, and the DNA that was placed in, Mary carried within it the genetic recipes for fulfilling the order that Jesus should be the super Messiah announced over millennia by many prophets.
Did he know he was a descendant of Sophia?
When Jesus was born, he began to discover gradually. When he began to read the sacred scriptures, he would say, this here is me. But when he read about what he would have to do, he began to have problems.
Like dying.
No, he would have to dominate people using his superpowers. And then he began to hesitated, and hesitated until the end.
The Bible, like the Gospels in the normal Bible, Matthew, Luke, and so on, they are the part of the story they wanted to tell us. I suppose you must have heard several other stories that aren't there. I've skimmed over some apocryphal texts that tell stories of Jesus as a child, which show that he was a child.
Yeah, but that's flawed from what's known in spirituality. You see, after Jesus died, perhaps the conclusion I should say that I still haven't said is that Jesus refused to carry out his mission. That's why he was crucified. Just to conclude the previous subject.
That's very interesting, because isn't Catholic religion built on the fact that Jesus was sacrificed?
Well, yes, but the Catholic religion turns a blind eye to the fact that on Thursday, before the Friday he was crucified, Maundy Thursday, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus said, Yahweh, Abba, spare me from these guys. You wanted me to use my superpowers to fulfill the terms of your old covenant, to make every human being submissive to you. I can't do it. I find it unworthy. But I created the good news in which I will lead all humans through love. No, that doesn't interest me, Yahweh God. You're breaking your word once again. This is a trap that the neighbor set for me when he said he would lend it to me. Blah, 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 you're not my son, nothing at all, blah, 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 it's a mess. A serious one. Then Yahweh said, don't use your superpowers to escape the crucifixion. At that moment, Jesus sweated blood out of despair because he had superpowers to do whatever he wanted, and he allowed himself to be crucified and therefore suffered like hell. But not to disobey Yahweh again, that's the problem that nobody understands. The Catholic Church turned a blind eye. Then they say, oh no, but there's an explanation for that. God is so wonderful that even though Jesus asked him to spare him, God loved so many human beings that he made his son. That is, the Catholic Church invents this theological excuse, and we humans childishly absorb it and don't question it. It's not set in stone. What is the Bible that we know today? It's a collection of 73 books, where you have 46 books in the Old Testament and 27 in the New Testament. These 46 books of the Old Testament were previously called the Septuagint, but there were 47 books. What the hell is the Septuagint? It was 2 centuries before Jesus was born, when Alexander the Great ruled the world. The most important Jews of that time, children of the diaspora of the schism back then, went to live. In Alexandria, then 70 Jewish sages to preserve Hebrew culture translated all the main Hebrew books into Greek. So this version of 47 books translated into Greek, made by 70 Jewish sages, was called the Septuagint, 2nd century BC. 600 years later, Jerome takes this Septuagint, removes the Book of Enoch, reduces it from 47 to 46.
So the Book of Enoch is controversial then?
It's controversial. But why? But it also spoke of Yahweh, and Yahweh needed to disappear from the book that was now to be adopted as official by European Catholics, so they got rid of Enoch.
I see.
So Jerome then considered the Old Testament to be made up of 46 books, the 5. Initial ones that are from the Jewish Torah. Genesis, Deuteronomy, Numbers, Exodus, Leviticus, plus 16 historical, 18 prophetic, 7 wisdom books. This here is the Old Testament. And what did Jerome do? He took 21 epistles, 4 Gospels, the classics, plus Revelation, plus the Acts of the Apostles, these 27 books, New Testament. He translated all of this into Latin. This is the Bible we have. There's no news about Jesus from childhood youth. They got rid of it all to erase. Jesus' Jewish origins. The less Europeans remembered that Jesus had been Jewish, the better. Anastasius and Ambrose are the two main cardinals, bishops of the time, who in the years 370, 380 of the 4th century got rid of all the Gospels that spoke of Jesus as a child, adolescent, regardless of whether the stories there were real or invented to disparage Jesus, since that also existed. So, mate, it's crazy. The Catholic Church hides this if you talk to priests, bishops, and delve deep into this subject. Basically, no one knows how to talk about it, even though they study it, but they study it in a way that doesn't raise questions. So, they say the first pope was Peter, the first pope was Damasus, who was Bishop of Rome. Constantine's time, and the synod fought with him, since it was the Church of Rome that was persecuted, was now going to be the most important, because Christianity had transformed into Catholicism, and they were arguing. What did Damasus do? He said to the synod, let's do this, shall we stop fighting? Sunday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, there at the Church of Sophia, you bring your followers out. Bring mine, we'll lock ourselves in the church and only come out when we've sorted out the synod. All right. At 2 p.m. on Sunday, the synod arrives with its followers, and Damasus was already there. With his followers, then he politely says, Synod, you go first. The synod entered with its followers. When everyone was inside, Damasus and his followers put wooden bars on the outside, set fire to the cathedral, killed the synod and its followers, and Damasus was elected pope.
Elected, eh? There's the smoke.
And then he was canonized.